Do you believe this?
He brought a passion to politics.
What about Florida? What about Florida? Florida counts.
Asking the questions of our time to the leaders of our time.
How do you respond to critics who say that you brought the nation to war under false pretenses?
Pointed, persistent, but polite.
Motivating, inspiring, keeping your word. Nothing more important.
Tough, but fair.
May I finish?
May I finish?
A man of faith and of family.
My son, Luke, said, Dad, can I have that board? And I was deeply touched until he said, you know what that thing's worth on eBay?
His voice was clear.
Tim Russert was at the top of his profession.
His legacy is long.
He was the standard bearer for serious journalism. And he also happened to be a great guy.
Journalist, husband, father, friend.
I interview politicians for a living, and people can get jaded and cynical about the political process, but all that is trumped by what a country. And I hope that idealism never leaves me.
It never did. Tonight, an NBC News special, remembering Tim Russert. Good evening. I'm Tom Brokaw, and tonight we are mourning a death in the family. Tim Russert, a beloved colleague and friend, moderator of Meet the Press, head of our Washington bureau, the very center of our political world here at NBC News. A friend with whom I shared many a late, long night waiting for a winner, died today of a heart attack. Tim was just 58 years old, but from the humblest of beginnings, he rose to one of the most powerful positions in journalism, always asking the questions the country wanted to ask and getting the answers the country deserved to know. But if the questions were tough, Tim the man was pretty soft-hearted. He was a devoted son who wrote a best-selling book about his father and a loving husband and father who could not have been more proud of his son Luke. Dennis Murphy tonight looks back at the life of Tim Russert.
My thanks to the NBC News Political Dream Team. You've had an easy Sunday in the cushy studio. Now back out on the road, all right? That's all for today. We'll be back next week at our regular time. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
It was, as it turned out, Tim's final sign-off in a rare political season every fiber of his being was focused on.
All right.
He didn't live on that news set in a suit and tie, though that's how most of us remember him best, as moderator of Meet the Press, where the nation's political class was well advised to bring its best game.
Filegate, Travelgate, Whitewater. What's wrong with those as legitimate issues? You said that part of your $40 billion debt
I've also told your program
is $180 billion.
Yes, may I finish?
May I finish?
Finally, Mrs. Secretary, in February 2003,
He's still asking me questions. Yeah.
I think that was one of your staff, Mr. Secretary. I don't think that's appropriate.
Emily, get out of the way. Bring the camera back, please. I think we're back on, Tim. Go ahead with your last question.
Thank you very much, sir.
The sheer joy Tim felt for the whole political process just cut through the TV screen. From the candidates' debates...
Do you accept the support of Louis Farrakhan?
You know, I have been very clear in my denunciation of Minister Farrakhan's anti-Semitic comments.
To election night coverage with his famous low-tech erasable slate, making it clear, getting it right.
4 for 4. Florida, Florida, Florida. You're right, Keith.
Ahead of the Washington pack, he sometimes wrote the lead for the next day's papers. He called it for Barack Obama.
When you sit and reflect just for a fleeting second about what we are witnessing, this young 46-year-old African-American man, now the nominee of the Democratic Party, just put that in the context of our nation and the whole issue of race. It's breathtaking.
Russert had a quick wit. This was him warming up a debate audience this year by remembering a story about Ross Perot.
Well, I went to the airport after that show, and the flight attendant ran down the aisle. She said, "What did you think about Ross Perot?" I said, "Ma'am, I never comment on my guests or behavior. I leave that for others, talk radio, cable, whatever. But I'm curious, as a flight attendant, as a viewer, as a voter, what did you think of Ross Perot?" She paused, looked down, looked up, and said, "He strikes me as the kind of guy that would never return his tray table to the upright position."
When the tie came off, he was still Russert, as passionate about his family as his politics. His wife, Maureen North, the writer, and their son, Luke, just graduated this spring from Boston College. He almost wore a second hat on the national stage, premier political journalist and beloved family man. How many of us bought Russert's best-selling tribute to his dad, Big Russ of the title, and gave it to our own fathers, maybe with a note, "What Tim says about his dad goes for me too."
Big Russ did not emote. He did not grab you and say, I love you, you're my boy. Quite the opposite. It was, pick that up, you're late, let's go. I always knew he loved me, but he never quite said it in words that would resonate in that kind of way.
The devilish twinkle that was essential Russert might have appreciated the droll irony of one of America's most dutiful sons dying on the start of a Father's Day weekend.
No son loved a father more than Tim Russert loved his dad. And I think probably the reverse of that was true also.
In a Washington world of limos, famous faces, and $3,000 suits, Russert never forgot that he was shaped by his people. Blue-collar Irish Americans pulling shift work, his dad a garbage man, proud as he could be that he was humble Buffalo's favorite son, where this afternoon flags flew at half-staff. The Buffalo Bills, #1 fan.
Go you Buffalo Bills. Pull off the biggest upset in football history.
He was a man with a profound sense of place, and we, his listeners, should be grateful that you could take the boy out of Buffalo, but you know the rest of it.
All said and done.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't know that Tim was a lawyer and had a whole other life before claiming Sunday mornings and election nights as his own on television. He began working the other side of the fence from journalists as aide to two of the biggest names in American politics. In the early 80s, counsel to New York Governor Mario Cuomo, and before that, as New York Senator Daniel Moynihan's chief of staff. Russert was an insider's insider in the world of marble corridors and political intrigue. In 1984, though, he jumped that fence and signed on with NBC News, not as an on-air political pundit, but an executive office suit. Remember back then when the Today Show had an audience with the Pope, John Paul II? Russert, a devout Catholic, was instrumental in making that happen.
Tim was a very faithful Catholic. He was not ashamed of his faith.
He closed out the 80s as NBC News' Washington bureau chief. By 1991, he was on the air regularly in his Meet the Press chair. The guest seats were occupied, sometimes uneasily, by a rich pageant of world leaders and opinion makers. Russert, with his guests, wouldn't let them wriggle off the hook, but he always remained civil.
The issue that seems to be being used against you, Scott McClellan, is hypocrisy.
Never posed as the smartest boy in the class, he simply was, and the guests knew he'd done his homework. He regarded his institution of a broadcast, now in its 61st year, as a national treasure, he called it, a place where he modestly, and all too accurately, referred to himself as the temporary custodian. Throughout the 90s, Tim was on the air with his "Here's what you need to keep your eye on" insights. He'd made us all insiders to the big stories of the day, Monica and the impeachment, the 2000 election with the Supreme Court tiebreaker, Bush, Cheney, war, Scooter Libby, and the outing of a spy. Russert was called to testify that he wasn't the reporter who gave the name Valerie Plame to the vice president's chief of staff. He helped us meet the new stars of politics and said goodbye to the fallen. And how strange that today it was suddenly his time. Office rumors that Tim had slumped at the bureau and an ambulance had taken him away. Rumors confirmed a heart attack announced in early afternoon by his longtime colleague on so many election nights of our era, Tom Brokaw.
And it is my sad duty to report this afternoon that my friend and colleague Tim Russert, the moderator of Meet the Press and NBC's Washington bureau chief, collapsed and died early this afternoon while at work at the NBC News Bureau in Washington.
Shock tributes poured in from the guests who'd wriggled in his hot seat.
This was a great guy, a great journalist, and the truth is he made us all better.
They knew Russert, had shaken his hand, sometimes shaken their heads at him. But if you watched him on TV, you knew him too. Russ's boy made good. Your own tribute is as good as any Paul's. So maybe remember for a few moments on a Father's Day weekend a stand-up guy who loved generations of his family. We'll still have Sundays. We just won't have Tim.
In a moment, back with more Remembering Tim Russert.